Ever since they got buffed, the 120 RPM hand cannons have solidified their place as a top option in the meta. Yes, DMT is making some waves on PC, but I think the 120 RPM hand cannons are still top options in the metagame. So today I want to have a discussion about the 120 RPM hand cannons, what makes them so strong, what are their shortcomings, because I really think that this hand cannon archetype's balancing is really interesting to look at in comparison to the rest of the game. So I'm going to go over different elements of the 120 RPM hand cannons and different facets of them in no particular order. And I want to talk about, firstly, the range. The range on these hand cannons is insane, and a lot of people might mention that it's enough range to step into and intrude other long-range weapon space, like pulse rifles and even scout rifles. These things have crazy range up until about 45 meters without damage drop-off, not counting 3-tap range after you get some damage drop-off, so your 3-tap range will be further than that while ADSing in terms of a max range scenario. So yeah, these things have quite a lot of range. The interesting thing about these weapons though is the fact that while they have a lot of range, they don't have a good time to kill, and this is where time to kill comes into this discussion, because while they do have the ability to deal high damage over range, they still don't have a better time to kill than the majority of weapons they'd be contesting in that space, like pulse rifles and like scout rifles. Believe it or not, 1 second flat is one of the, if not the slowest time to kill in the game as far as optimal time to kill. So this becomes really interesting to look at because yes, while we feel the range is insane and almost broken on these weapons, at the same time, they have such a slow time to kill compared to other things that again would be contesting them in that space. So why are they so dominant? Why are they so powerful? The reason for this is because of their consistency and hand cannons naturally having low shots to kill combined with some generous aim assist. I think the community is realizing that no, it's not just 150 RPM hand cannons, even though they had one of the highest values that made it a little crazier. It's not just the 120s either. Hand cannons in general have very generous amounts of aim assist, and hitting headshots with hand cannons, especially in their sweet spot where the aim assist cone is at its largest point, headshots become almost trivial, like upper body shots. So hand cannons, because of their high damage per shot, require the least shots to kill, but also because of the high damage, require the lowest time on target for a kill in terms of being able to just instantly deal high damage. Those factors are what contributes to the consistency of a hand cannon and make their time to kill, even though it's slower, more consistent in some cases than a pulse rifle, or have less risk than a pulse or a scout rifle, despite them having better potential. Sure, you might have the better potential on a scout or a pulse, but when you're going for headshots, you're gonna have more time on target most likely, and probably a little less generous aim assist, but that depends on the range of course. But because of those two factors, because you have to spend more time on target, and especially against a good player playing cover, it's gonna make your time to kill less consistent. Now, although the hand cannons have a slow time to kill, it becomes less impactful because they're consistently achieving it nearly every time, versus a pulse rifle, which is going to struggle against a good competent player utilizing it and effectively flinching and stopping a pulse player or a scout player from keeping their crosshair on target as much as they need to get their potential best time to kill or faster time to kill. And the good player is probably going to be playing cover on top of that, like I mentioned. So yeah, that's why pulses and scouts will still struggle. Now, this also isn't factoring in that 120 hand cannons are the most consistent hand cannon archetype in the game. They can kill in 1 head 2 body, or let's say 2 head 1 body against someone that's appropriately spec'd at 5 resilience. So it's not even a 100% critical hit ratio, it's a 66% crit hit ratio. And that's another really interesting talking point. While the critical hit ratio of the 120 hand cannons helps them perform better on the average basis, pretty much ensuring that you have a high chance of hitting your 3-tap, they do once again have a very slow time to kill. What they do maintain though, once again, is ultimate consistency. They are incredibly consistent at doing what they do. Sure, they don't have high potential, but in the hands of a skilled player, being able to do very high damage per shot while utilizing cover correctly and giving other weapons a hard time, that is more than enough because of how consistent they are. I'd like to quickly tackle the difference between consistency and ease of use though. I see a lot of people saying 120 hand cannons are just so easy to use. And I actually disagree with this in a way, not fully, but you'll see what I'm saying. 120 RPM hand cannons give you the best opportunity to land the 3-tap. And this is because of their lower critical hit ratio like I mentioned. But also, like I said, you're giving up high potential of fast time to kill for a slow time to kill that you're gonna hit more often. But funny enough, 120 hand cannons have the most time in between shots, which means they actually punish you the most for missing shots or not even hitting your optimal time to kill. If you don't hit your optimal time to kill against another hand cannon, you pretty much auto lose so long as they hit their shots. Not even including their optimal time to kill. If they hit their 4th shot and you hit your 4th shot, you're pretty much auto losing the gunfight by a pretty good margin. And furthermore, if you miss a shot, it's incredibly punishing because, like I said, it has the longest time in between shots to go for your follow-up shot, and that could cost you a gunfight. And just to quickly tackle the aim assist discussion around these hand cannons, the 120s typically have some of the lowest aim assist values. They're just more persistent over range because of their high range stats. But the value itself, the size of the aim assist cone, is typically smaller than the other archetypes. However, like I said, as a community, we're kind of realizing that, yeah, especially with targeting mods, hand cannons are just kind of really generous, especially at the sweet spots. So for all intents and purposes, these hand cannons aren't necessarily easy. They're actually pretty punishing if you don't get your optimal time to kill, which it tries to offer you consistency in achieving. It's consistent, not necessarily easy. And like I've said many times, there's a trade-off for that consistency, which is your time to kill potential. 150 RPM hand cannons before their nerf to 140s were examples of weapons that were both high potential, easy, and consistent all at once. They had a high potential optimal time to kill, so a fast optimal time to kill. They were the least punishing for missing shots and had some very generous aim assist values. And of course, high enough DPS that was still significant enough and could allow you to 3-tap. Compared to 120s, I believe that 120s at least have some trade-offs. Like I said, their time to kill, consistency, and punishment for missing that offered consistency in its optimal time to kill. Yet somehow, even if these weapons conceptually feel seemingly more balanced than we might expect, they're still so strong to go against. So why is that? I mentioned the shots to kill argument plus the consistency really does hurt other weapons even if they do have better potential than these weapons' optimal time to kill. But the range of the 120s still has a high impact. And the reason being is because it allows you to engage and still deal high damage from relative safety. Whereas with other hand cannon archetypes or even some other weapon archetypes, you'd have to play a little bit more aggressively, close the gap, and play cover while doing so, playing in a little bit more riskier space, a space that had a little bit more vulnerability while trying again to make the most out of your weapon. Whereas with 120s, you can deal very high damage per shot from usually relative safety on most maps. And what really makes this worse is that in endgame PvP and trials, there's no immediate objective, so you don't really have to push out for any reason, which would be the one semi-vulnerability of this archetype not being as good in close range against other more forgiving options that can apply pressure on them. Because you don't have to move, you can sit in a relatively safe space and continue to deal high impact damage on singular shots for your team before actually deciding to play aggressively on the other team. Basically, you get to play high impact with much lower risk. The reason these hand cannons specifically need some good damage drop-off is because they have an inherently higher damage output. What this means is that they're going to be able to even 3-tap further past when they start getting damage drop-off, so long as you're hitting about 66 to 68 damage per shot, you can still 3-tap. The only thing it'll change is whether you have to hit 1 head 2 body, 2 head 1 body, or 3 head. And them getting damage drop-off sooner sure still allows you to 3-tap, but does hurt their consistency and puts more demand on the player to be hitting headshots, or ultimately at some ranges you just won't be able to 3-tap. You'll still be doing more damage than other archetypes most likely, but you won't get your optimal time to kill, and without your optimal time to kill, again, you're getting some pretty slow time to kills. But as a community, I do recall us being very vocal that 120 should have more range than the other hand cannon archetypes to separate them. Mind you, this was in the world of the 150 hand cannons being present, and I know it doesn't account for the entire community, but I remember these discussions being quite present. So now we have higher range 120s. And I've talked about the importance of these hand cannons specifically needing some damage drop off. However, I think the bigger issue, and I think I'm going to go over this in another video, and this might be a hot take, is the fact that all hand cannons got a significant range upgrade, and then on top of that, they needed to separate the 120s, so they gave them even more range. And I think those two things stacking on top of each other made these just a bit ridiculous. I wanted to quickly move away from the range discussion and talk about the RPM shift. A lot of people tell me that they think the reason the 120s are so broken is because they didn't need to go from 110 to 120. Ultimately, I think that is not impactful whatsoever to your time to kill. In fact, in Destiny 1, 110 hand cannons, or the aggressive hand cannons, were actually 120s, and they killed in 1 second. The difference of 0.07 seconds is not making a big difference in your time to kill. I think that what it is impacting, though, is the feel of the weapon. I think the 120s just felt unnecessarily sluggish compared to other weapons, and that truly was a rate of fire and time to kill that was stuck in Year 1 Destiny 2's sandbox. So I personally don't believe this is the central problem. It just makes these weapons feel less unreasonably sluggish. As I mentioned, I think the problem is a mix of the range and the double dip hand cannon range buff that these kind of got, but also, let's talk about damage perks. There's an abundance of damage boosting abilities in this game that work in PvP right now. Rampage alone with 1 stack is enough to allow this hand cannon archetype to 2-tap, of course by proxy, so is Swashbuckler up until I believe 5 Resilience, and so is Kill Clip. But then you have Charge with Light, so you can get a 20% damage boost, which is 2 stacks of Rampage, off of picking up an orb or other small little tasks you can do, and you can have those all stacked to have different methods of obtaining that. There's also Whisper of Hedrons, which gives you a damage buff for a considerable amount of time just for freezing someone with something like a Cold Snap, not even having to get a kill. Again, all of these things push 120s over the edge, where they no longer are just weapons with no potential but high consistency, but all the potential in the world, and still versatility and consistency. Ultimately though, I can't really decide in my mind, is this a problem with the archetype's damage output, or is this a problem with the abundance of damage boosts, or perhaps the strength of the damage boosts? Perhaps these damage boosts shouldn't even be on these weapons, and I thought that's the direction that Bungie was going in when they made the Steady Hand, but then with Igneous Hammer, they kind of just went back on that. So I retain the opinion that the 120 hand cannons might have more trade-offs than you might think, and I think that they actually are maybe better balanced than it might seem on the surface. However, they have some elements that negate some of the things that keep them in check. I think ultimately these hand cannons are meta because of their very high range and how that interacts with their consistency, and the fact that it does not alter their consistency, whereas if they had lower range, it would alter and challenge their consistency. The existence of no objectives in things like trials also plays to the benefit of these hand cannons. Then on top of it, damage perks absolutely push these things over the edge, and there's, like I said, a million ways to boost their damage. And then of course add all those things on to the inherent consistency that the archetype deserves, as well as the generous aim assist of hand cannons, and well, you have an archetype that is ultimately consistent. And you know, I think that's cool, although it does need to be toned down. It's the most consistent in the game, and the one good thing out of this, I think, is I believe the community's kind of seen the power now of consistency over potential. There's always a lot of talks before about time to kill being a sole factor, but I think this has made people realize, perhaps, that consistency is king. That consistency can trump potential in a lot of different ways, especially in the case of these 120s, which, like I said, probably need a nerf, and it seems like they're getting one. On a complete side note, I still don't think these hand cannons are terrible for the game because, like I said, if you're playing out in the open, you're not utilizing cover well and peek shooting, you're just simply not going to be using these hand cannons to the fullest like a good player would be, because you're going to be a lot more vulnerable and playing to the weakness of these hand cannons and their slow rate of fire and slow time to kill, rather than negating that by playing cover and putting in high damage output from safety and low risk. So yeah, I do think it takes like a really good player to really show the benefits of this, and there is a skill gap from a top tier player to a entry level player with these hand cannons, so that's why I kind of like them. But nonetheless, they're pretty hot. I do think they need to be nerfed, but it was just meant to be an interesting discussion video that gets the thoughts going, and I really think that these hand cannons and the balancing of them is such an interesting topic because of the nature of them. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy.